Joining me now to weigh in, representing Texas's 4th Congressional District, Congressman Pat Fallon. Congressman, thank you for joining me. Congressman, first I'll get your reaction to these climate activists protesting outside of the White House. I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 3 years, so I'm very familiar with the protesters. It's like the same group. They have something new to protest every other day. But I don't want to lie here. Like, I kind of get a little of enjoyment out of seeing like the radical left going after the radical left.
Listen, I don't get in the way of the leftists when they eat their own.
Yeah.
But, you know, to even hear my colleagues' lies just made me a bit nauseous, and it is lunchtime. I mean, it's unbelievable. Come on. First of all, the wind turbines in Texas only accounted for a fraction, like about 1/10 of the power, and 50% of those froze, which led to the freeze. Now, the freeze also in Texas, it's a 130-year event. It's very rare that it occurs. And it wasn't because fossil fuels fail. It was because we were relying, quite frankly, too heavy on renewables that aren't, the market doesn't bear that. If it weren't for subsidies, we wouldn't even have them right now, because the free market cannot sustain renewable energy right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting that she takes aim at the issue when she just had nothing to do with it. I mean, you're in Texas and you know what happened, and you can better articulate it than anyone else. And she just comes up with all these things. So they come up with these like Green New Deals and these plans and stuff, but it actually doesn't really do anything to combat so-called climate change. They won't explain that to you. It's more about taxes and regulations, less freedom. We learned that the first time around with the Green New Deal. And then we were just playing the video of the climate activists in front of the White House. They have like wheelbarrows, they have posters, they have like all these items made of plastic. I'm assuming a lot of them drove their cars to get to the protest. So they want to eliminate fossil fuels, okay, but then like how are they going to have their poster boards and get in their cars to get to these protests and have all that stuff? Everything we have in life pretty much is made from fossil fuels. Like, we can't get by as a society without it.
There's a moral case to be made for fossil fuels, and we discussed this in the Oversight Committee yesterday. And I mean, it's obvious when with the life expectancy in 1900 in the United States was 46 years of age. Today it's 79. That's a 72% increase. And look at the quality of life that we lead now as opposed to 100 years ago. And the advances in technology. This is all due to fossil fuels. So the left likes to decry the fact that you're an evil fossil fuel producer. But yet they'll tell you on their iPhone, they'll get their iPhone out and they'll say, I hate multinational corporations. Let me text you. So give me your iPhone, give me, God forbid, most of the clothing that they wear, they're going to have to go back to fig leaves and sticks. Because
exactly.
That's the only thing not made by multinational corp.
Well, and if it wasn't for fossil fuels, AOC wouldn't be able to sell those $60 cheap sweatshirts. I'm not saying $60 is a lot of money for a sweatshirt, but they're like $10 sweatshirts that she's selling online for $60. So those come from fossil fuels too. So again, they like to preach and they want to change the way we live, but they don't want to actually follow their own rules. So it's pretty sickening.
Steph, if the left didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all.
Yeah, it's a great point. So I want to make it clear, Republicans aren't against money for infrastructure. They just want to make sure that the money is actually being spent on infrastructure plans and projects. So we know the original infrastructure plan as it is, the $2 trillion that Biden wants to spend on projects, has like very little to do with roads and bridges, more about just a lot of nonsense. And then we have people twisting themselves into pretzels trying to explain why infrastructure could mean anything. Like, it could literally mean anything.
Well, yes. So let's be really clear to the viewers out there. Roads, bridges, highways, 5% of the $2.3 trillion will be spent on that. Even if you want to broaden the definition reasonably to include broadband internet, things like that in the 21st century, it's still only $400 billion of the 2.3, so it's less than 18%. So where the heck's the other 82% going? Well, there's a laundry list that the left is now claiming is quote-unquote infrastructure. And they say it's universal pre-K, it's climate action, caregiving, climate guidance. I don't know what the hell climate guidance is. Affordable housing, police accountability, and paid leave. That ain't infrastructure, but they're claiming it is.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of these buffoons on the mainstream media. They get out the dictionary, they read the definition of infrastructure, and then again try to like make it seem like all of these things that you just listed would be included and fit in that definition, which is totally ludicrous. So the Senate Republicans, they unveiled their plan, the counteroffer, $568 billion, still a lot of money, but most of that would actually go to infrastructure projects, as we've discussed. Is this something that you support?
You know, something I'm not sure about the figure, but listen, when we even take the $115 billion that Biden had allocated for actual infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, that kind of thing, waterways, it would still leave about 88% of the roads that do need and the highways that are in dire need of repair unrepaired. So let's focus on true infrastructure. And I'm not sure. In fact, let's work the right way forward. Look at what we need to have fixed and what we need to shore up, and then ask for the price tag. Not pick out an arbitrary number from the sky and say this is what we're going to spend. Because you know what? We've been doing that too much in D.C., and that's not a good use of taxpayer dollars.
Definitely not. So I know you have a lot to say about this because I looked on Twitter, but so the House passed the D.C. Statehood bill that would make Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, the 51st state. That is totally insane. It's been like a hard news week. I almost feel like numb. Just based off all the crazy stuff. Every day I wake up and like, am I in a nightmare? Like, am I going to wake up at some point?
That happens to you too. It happens to me too.
Yes.
When I'm in DC, yeah.
Explain this to me. I have a feeling this isn't going to pass the Senate unless, of course, they're able to get rid of the filibuster. Then they're going to push all of these crazy things through. I don't think Manchin supports something like this. There's a reason why Washington, D.C. isn't the 51st state to begin with. And then there's a lot of other things we have to think about here. Like, are we going to add another star to the flag? Like, how does this all work? And why? Well, the Democrats want this because they just want extra representation, and they know that D.C. is a very, like 93 or like 98% of the people that lived in D.C. back in 2016 voted for Hillary Clinton. Come on, it's crazy.
Yeah, this past election cycle was 92% to 5.
Wow.
5%. So here's a problem, Steph. First of all, there's a little something called the Constitution. And the Constitution made the federal city, it's a district, it's a city, it's not a state. James Madison, we want to talk about founder's intent, and Federalist Papers 43 talks specifically about the fact that he didn't want the capital city in any particular state because they would have an inordinate effect and impact on the federal government. So we have made it a district. We retroceded, there's something called retrocession. And in 1846, the D.C. portion of Virginia, the D.C. portion that was in Virginia, was ceded back to the state of Virginia. If we're really truly talking about taxation without representation, we should retrocede the most of D.C. back to Maryland, so then they can be represented by 2 U.S. senators. They'll be from Annapolis, and they'll get an additional member of Congress, and then there'll only be a very narrow strip that will be D.C. proper. But in order to do that, we need to repeal the 23rd Amendment that gave D.C. 3 electoral votes. So they're putting the cart before the horse. They're acting unconstitutionally. It's a naked power grab. But they try to take the high horse. And Stephanie, I got fired up and very angry yesterday when I'm on the House floor and they say, this is about race. This is racism, because Washington, D.C. is, of course, majority black. So they say that's why anybody that would oppose it, which is horse hockey. Because we're on television, I'll say that word. 160 years, from 1800 to about 1960, Washington was a white majority city, and they didn't make it a state then. There was no serious push to make it a state. This has nothing to do with race and everything about democratic power.
Well, as soon as they jump to racism, we know that they actually have nothing to debate. This is a tactic that they use for everything. It's very tiring, and then it actually waters down what real racism is and what people experience. So it's really terrible that they do that. Really quickly, since you're in Texas, and Texas is a border state, the impact of illegal immigration. The Biden administration has been doing a terrible job when it comes to the handling of the crisis. They want nothing to do with it. Harris was assigned to be the border czar. She hasn't been down there. Now she might like Zoom in conference call with the president of Guatemala next week. I thought it was going to be this week, but it's going to be next week now. And then I read this report here. It says Biden's going to assemble an anti-corruption task force to take on illegal immigration, which is interesting. But maybe he should stop sending out the signal that you're welcome here. We're going to give you amnesty. We're going to give you a bunch of freebies. Well, even actually, when you get to the border, we're probably going to put you on a plane with a little care package and then send you into the interior of the country.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, no, you're right. And so thanks to Joe Biden, the U.S. government is now facilitating, and is a partner to, the largest human trafficking operation the world has ever known. What people aren't realizing is El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are so impoverished that a lot of those people don't have the money to come here. So the Mexican drug cartels are helping with their transit. And if they can't pay, they'll say, that's okay, you owe us. Tell them that you have a relative in Philadelphia. They go up there and they have to work it off. Now, what's the cartel involved with? Obviously, illegal immigration, drugs, and sexual trafficking. So that's that's what's happening now. And then to have Harris blaming this whole issue and the crisis, Biden's border crisis, on storms and bad soil and drought, is a joke. And she's blaming it on climate change. And Stephanie, she's right about one thing. It is climate change. Climate change at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, because the climate change from President Trump and his stern stance on the border to their open border policies.
Yeah. And I appreciate the effort. You got to tackle corruption, because that's one of the big reasons why people are coming here from Latin America. You think of all of the drug cartels, the lawlessness, no law and order, and the corruption. And so people are fleeing. Most of them are economic refugees, and that's not like a reason that we should let people into the country. Of course, people do. Some of them have legitimate asylum claims, and they'll be taken care of. But what we learned from the last huge caravans that were coming through, a lot of them just didn't even qualify, and then a lot of them didn't want to stay in Mexico, so they just went home. They packed up and they're like, nah, we're good. Well, I'll just go back to wherever I came from. So anyways, Congressman, we're going to leave it here. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. God bless.
Thank you.